Alright, we're gonna do some rigs this morning. This is St. Xavier Bass Team practice meeting. We're going to talk about all different sorts of rigs that you might need to use in various fishing situations, what kind of rods and line you might pair them up with to fish them effectively. So we're going to start out with Carolina rig. Is that right? Carolina rig? Okay. So for Carolina rig, you're going to want to go, depending on the size of the rig, depending on the size of the hook and the weight, and the situation you're fishing. Most people will try to put it on a bait caster that's fairly stiff. This is my flipping stick, my little flipping stick. This is a Carbon Light 7-foot medium heavy rod, which Bass Pro Shop now is making white, which is kind of disappointing, but I like the darker colored one for camouflage purposes. I've got a high-speed reel, which is what you're going to want for most applications where you're dragging on the bottom, either a jig or a Carolina rig, Texas rig, any of these kind of contact baits. This is 7-to-1 speed reel Pro Qualifier. This is the one that's on sale right now for $50 instead of $100. So I've just bought 2 more of them. There's one lower speed one we'll talk about in a minute. So Carolina rig. People fish all sorts of different mainline. A lot of times people like fluorocarbon for their mainline because it will sink. For any kind of bottom contact baits, you've got more direct contact with the bait. But often they'll say to fish mono for your leader because then it'll kind of float up off the bottom and give your bait a little slower fall, a little more action. So the whole point of this Carolina rig is that you're separating the bait from the weight, so it gives it a little slower fall. And what I'm going to do right now, a lot of people will carry an extra spool of line, but I'm just going to cut it off my mainline right now. Leader lengths vary. You can make it anywhere from, say 15 inches like that to 4 feet. A lot of people will fish it up to 4 feet long. I'm going to do kind of a medium length one today, about maybe 3 feet. So I'm going to cut this. Usually when you're talking about these, you're talking about 2 kinds of weights, depending on the bottom contour and composition. Mostly I'll fish it with a bullet sinker. The problem with these is they get hung up in rocks a little more, they get wedged in rocks, so a lot of times people will use an egg sinker if you're fishing around more like rocky bottoms. And it doesn't really matter as far as the visibility to the fish because this is far away from the bait. They're not really going to see it. So I even made up this little guy. This is was inspired by a pre-made rig I saw somebody else using that was sold somewhere, and I just made these. You put the swivel at each end. This is 50-pound braided line, middle is for. So as you're dragging along the bottom, I figured it'd be better for keeping it from getting worn down on rocks and stuff. So this is kind of the part of the bait that drags the bottom. And then I made it so it slides still, so when the fish bites it, it still has a little bit of room to pull away before it feels the weight. So that's this is kind of a quick change method, but I'm going to show you the actual full rig if you're going to tie it. So just for fun, I'm going to tie it with a little 1/2-ounce egg sinker for today. So you put that on the main line. I'm going to do it without a bead right now. Some people will use a bead. If you're going to use a bead, you put that on next so the bead would push in between the weight and the swivel. I'm not going to do that right now, partly because this is not an extremely heavy weight. If it was more like an ounce or something, it would be beaten up against the knot and it would be wearing down the knot. So I use my approved cinch knot, which is just you put it through the swivel. I use this for almost everything. This knot, twist it 8 times, about. I'm going to do it through the little loop that I've formed here at the bottom of the line. You see that? So I'm going through the little loop at the bottom, and then I'm going back through this other loop that I've just formed. I'm going to pull that up, see how that's working. You always wet your knot to get it cinched down without burning the line. You're just going to pull it down, cinch it down tight. And for this part of it, it doesn't really matter, but I usually trim all my tags to about that length anyway. Maybe about 1/4 inch, just for neatness, I guess. And then we'll take our leader that we made, tie that onto the other side here. Same knot. Sometimes people use a slightly lighter leader material just for stealth. And then also if you get hung up with the hook, you can break off just the hook and not your whole rig. And I definitely a lot of times do that when I'm catfishing. if I'm really around a lot of snagging bottom and I know when they hung up. Because I use the same rig for catfish. I use it also when I'm at the beach for flounder and redfish and all those kind of things when I'm fishing live mullet. It's the same thing. It actually evolved from that. That's why it's called a Carolina rig. It's kind of from like intercoastal fishing, you know, around saltwater marshes and stuff. It's kind of where it came from. And definitely, I use it in Carolina when I go there. So then you're going to use worm hook. This is a wide gap. So 4/0 you can use, depending on the size of your bait, you're going to use the hook corresponding. This 4/0 fits pretty well on a bait about this size. Any kind of bigger worm, I've fished up to like 10.5-inch worms on this same size hook. And then you kind of like flipping bait. I'll use the same hook for my Texas rig. I'll show you in a second. So I'm going to tie that on, same knot as the other one. If I'm fishing this in a coastal situation with mullet, I might use a hook more similar to this, something little that I can put on the live minnow. You know, if I was using something a really small bait on this, I'd go down as small as I needed to hook wise. I might go down to a really small worm hook, maybe 1/0 or smaller. If I was using some kind of really finesse bait, something like this that I want to pull behind, you know, I'd use a little tiny bait or a little tiny hook. You're trying to make it look natural. You're trying to make enough hook where you can get a good hook set in the fish, but you're not overwhelming the bait. You know, part of the deal with this is you want it to float up off the bottom a little bit. So for this particular tag right here, this is the one where the fish might actually see it, so I might go slightly shorter. So this is basically the rig now. A longer rod is good when you're throwing something like this. Like I've got this on a 7-foot. Some people go 7.5 or 8-foot rods when you're trying to throw this. Just because it's a long leader. You know, you're kind of making a lob cast, making it long. The longer leader helps with the longer rod. So this is the way this would work. And then I'm going to rig it. Any kind of creature bait, or you can use like a fluke, you know, or some kind of minnow bait if you want to. Any kind of bait it's going to mimic what you think they're feeding on at that particular spot. A lot of times people use something similar to this. So anytime you're rigging a bait, you're trying to get it on there really straight so that it's not twisting around as you're bringing it in. This one's kind of used, I've had it before, so putting it in as straight as I can, coming out here right in the middle, and then I'm going to go back to where it looks like the hook's going to come through, keep the bait from being kinked up. Come through and keep the bait nice and straight. See that? It's laying nice and straight across, so it's not going to roll and get all valved up. And depending on the kind of cover I'm fishing, if I think I'm going to be fishing really heavy cover and I'm going to get hung up a lot, I'll bury that hook point a little bit. I'll pull it up and just bury just the hook. Notice I've come all the way through the bait, so the hook's ready to come out like that, but I'm going to bury just the tip of it in the plastic, so it's less likely to hang up on stuff when it drags through there. That's a really well rigged bait now. It's nice and straight. It's hanging down well. It's not going to roll around and twist in the water. So as you're pulling this along, you just drag this along the bottom basically, and the bait will kind of float up and then just kind of settle back down behind the rig as you're pulling it. Sometimes people will kind of hop it up off the bottom, so it'll kind of kick it up and then let it kind of glide down again. And you're just basically feeling for any odd weight, or sometimes you'll feel a bite, but sometimes it's just kind of like just something there, you know, like it feels different than it felt before when you were just dragging it. And the hook set on this particular rig is like a longer sweep hook set. You're gonna kind of collect all this line, you know. It might be the fish might be sitting here and the weight might be sitting here when you're trying to set the hook, so you gotta collect all that line before you're actually doing anything with hook penetration. So you'll reel up until you kind of feel it, and then make a longer sweep hook set, usually off to the side like that. That's what people typically do with this rig. You are trying to penetrate, kind of get it out of the plastic, so it's a fairly hard hook set on this one. So that's a good bait for any time you're fishing around structure, deeper structure. People fish this in shallower water too, like 5 feet deep, whatever. If they just want to have this kind of presentation where it's falling slower, A lot of times if you're fishing in shallower water, they'll use a shorter leader and a lighter weight. You know, like you might use a weight more like this. It's like 3/16 kind of size. I mean, you don't need this huge weight if you're fishing in shallow water. This would be like maybe fishing in 15 to 30 feet of water kind of size. Might even this is the same. I believe this is the same weight as this. It's just a different shape. So this would be more for weedy kind of areas that punch through weeds better. I like the same line pre-made, but this one's kind of easy because you just tie like the main line here, leader here, and you're ready to go. You're already kind of got the beads on there. You got the bullet sinker, and this is 50-pound braid, so it makes it tough. So that's the Carolina rig. A lot of fishermen caught on it. A lot of different species of fish, not just bass. Questions about that one? Okay, so pause there a second.